morning, Cherries fans, and welcome to the 12th episode here at Up the Cherries in all departments of our cherry picking podcast. And it is a pleasure to welcome a special guest with me today in the form of Mani. How are you doing, Mani?
All good, mate. Thank you very much for having me on. It is wonderful to come cherry picking. I think I've told you last time I've done some strawberry picking before, so cherry picking will be delightful.
Excellent stuff. We like it, Mani. We like it. And of course, this man needs no introduction. It is Sam Harrison. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Greg. How you doing?
Yeah, all good, mate. All good. So, before we get going, let's just give a word to our sponsors, Dental on the Bank. To find out what they can do for you, visit dentalonthebanks.co.uk. So, of course, we got a very, very impressive win at the weekend on Saturday against Leicester City, where we did go 1-0 down fairly early, but we did come back. And that means it's now 5 unbeaten for Gary O'Neill. Firstly, let's get, because Manny, you're an Arsenal fan. Let's get your thoughts on Gary O'Neill and the job he's done after Scott Parker's 9-0 hammering and the comments afterwards.
Yeah, listen, if you remember, Craig, I did mention in the, I think it was the free-for-all, that given the job that he's done to be able to, I mean, in the few games since then, to steady the ship and try and get a few good results after that, he should have done enough to make sure that he keeps the job at least for the remainder of this season. And I think when it comes to that sort of a result, how he's been able to tackle everything and how he's been able to get the players on his side and the changes he's made. Obviously, dropping Travers for Neto was a choker for the young Irishman because, but it had to happen. You know, if you want to make an omelette, you have to break an egg, if as it were. But since Neto's come in, for example, he's looked quite solid. He's commanded the defense well. And that's what you get when you have someone of his experience coming in. I also think it might not be remiss to say that tactically, you certainly become a lot tighter, if you will. And of course, the win against Nottingham Forest at the City ground was also quite big. Winning over there at your former Cherry Steve Cook's home ground would have been all the more satisfying. But what struck me about that win and this win as well is how you were able to fight back and take all 3 points even after going down. And it looks as though you've stuck with the 4-4-2, no thrills, no spills, no overkills, and a more or less settled side. And obviously with Solanke and Billing doing the business, top billing, as it were. You seem to have found a formation which works, and obviously you can bring on Jade and Anthony and a few others to come in and, either provide some more impetus or steady the ship, and things are looking a lot better. So there is that solidity. I think my biggest issue, though, Craig, is, come the second half of the season, there are going to be a lot of teams who will obviously have made, average starts this season, but who are also going to look to try to come up the table. And they're going to look to you, you and your team as a team which has to be beaten. It is a potential banana skin, but you're going to be the litmus test with regard to the rest of their campaigns, and they're obviously going to want to get a result against you. So that's probably going to be the time when you might need to maybe consider strengthening in January, maybe getting, I don't know, another midfielder perhaps or a defender, and just making sure that you stay tight because the strikers you have now are starting to come good. They're starting to do the business. You are scoring goals. I'm prepared to just make sure that you. I mean, I'd like to see you make sure that you maintain that spine and keep things a bit tight. But just remember, they're going to want to come at you. They're going to want to score goals, and they're going to want to try and emulate that result. So be a little bit careful. Don't rest on your laurels just yet.
Yep, most definitely. And that's a good point, actually, with regards to, of course, Bill Foley is taking over at the club. We'll speak about that in a moment. But with regards to the investment that's needed in the side, what do you reckon, Sam? Where do we need to focus on?
Well, yeah. So theoretically, I would definitely say another defender, bring in to strengthen the back a bit. Maybe another midfielder. With regards to a striker, to get another striker in as well, just to have a bit extra there, because obviously if you get Solanke injured, you've only got more as the main out and out. You need someone else. So there's definitely room for investment and improvement. But yeah, we've been going good the last 5 games. Hopefully we'll keep it going. And yeah, even a goalkeeper as well, maybe, because obviously other than Travers is Will Dennis. So, and obviously Neto's only signed a year contract currently. So you don't know what's going to happen at the end of the season.
Maybe he could have a year's extension. You don't know.
Fingers crossed.
The one thing I think as well up front is Kiefer Moore. He is a target man, but does he really suit our style of play compared to somebody like Solanke, who does drop back a little bit? Solanke is an all-round striker. There was questions a couple of years back whether or not he was going to be able to get 20 goals a season. He managed 30 last year. But do you think that Kiefer Moore, being a target man, do you think we'll be able to utilise him really?
Good question. And obviously, when you see him play for Wales, he suits their style of play. So that's why he becomes more of a key player for Robert Page's side. And I'm sure he will be going to the World Cup as long as he makes sure he keeps himself fresh and gets enough minutes. And that is a fine question. And it sort of is a throwback to how England played when Alan Shearer was captain. I will always say right now, Craig, that one of the most numbing decisions that Glenn Hoddle made was to take the captaincy away from our Tony Adams, as it were, and give it to Shearer because it meant that Shearer could never be dropped. And it meant that England were forced to effectively play a style of football where crosses to his head were more or less mandatory. Don't get me wrong, he did deliver, but we were never really able to evolve from that. And so when he did retire after Euro 2000, it was sort of a blessing in disguise because England were able to evolve beyond that and certainly play Michael Owen, Wayne Rooney, and a few other strikers. And of course, Tottenham as well have Harry Kane, but at least Kane, like Solanke, as you would say, is a bit more of an all-round striker. He can drop back when he scores goals with his feet. Moore doesn't really seem to offer that much. And if you, as you've mentioned, if your style of play means that you can't really provide that sort of aerial service to Kiefer Moore too often, you got to question whether he might actually be a part of your plans. But having said all of that, there will be a role for guys like him.
Yeah.
He could certainly come off the bench and maybe try and win a header or two. You could, like, I remember, for example, for the Republic of Ireland, Niall Quinn used to be brought off the bench as more of a target man, 6'4", quite tall. He could win a few headers, and maybe contribute to the rest of the game. So maybe there is a role for Kiefer Moore to play as sort of a super sub with his height and his aerial ability. He could possibly play a bit of a role. But as a starter, no. I think what you've got going on with Solanke and Billing and maybe to some extent Anthony, if you want that strength and firepower, that might actually suit your play a little bit more. So we might be seeing less of Moore as the season goes on.
Yeah.
With regards to the midfield, it's always been one area that I thought coming into this season, which was our strongest position. So you've got Billin, Lerma, Cook. You've also got Ben Pearson in there. On the left-hand side, Jaden Anthony and Marcus Tavernier now. And on the right-hand side, Ryan Christie and Shriki Dembele, which, it's in a way, it was good that transfer didn't go through to prize Shriki Dembele away from the club. What do you make of him, guys?
So Dembele, I think, yeah, he's definitely got the pace. I think he's definitely got the right attitude, and I think he will develop into being a good player. I think now he does need minutes. So if we're not even going to give him the minutes, he does need to go out on loan and improve. Otherwise, he's just always sat on the bench. I'm surprised he hasn't come off the bench the last few games he's been on there. But I definitely reckon he's a big impact and he's got a lot of pace.
And of course, he was a signing from Peterborough. Peterborough was struggling last season. To be honest, they were struggling all season, but he was their standout player. If he was to go on loan, whereabouts would be a good place for him?
Maybe a Championship or a League One team could suit him. Obviously, I think he might feel a bit more at home in the Championship and might get a lot more minutes, a lot more game time. He can sort of really understand his game a bit better, and that could be good. I mean, I was thinking League One, but maybe League One would be too big of a drop, and it might not be fair to him. So another Championship team that might look to be the best option.
I think he's definitely a Championship player. He all day long he can fit into a Championship side and get 90 minutes all day.
The one team I was thinking of was somebody like QPR.
Yeah.
And QPR, they've got some very, very exciting players there. Ilias Chair, of course, up front. They've got a lot of quality around. Of course, it'll be a challenge for him to break into that side, but also be around players that will also improve him as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, QPR, of course, aside currently in the thick of trying to aim for promotion. I think they're third in the Championship now. So if there is an opportunity for him to come into that team and leave an impact, it could certainly help his confidence.
Yep, definitely. Well, let's look forwards. But one thing, of course, Manny, as we did say, you are an Arsenal fan at heart, but very, very good speaker from a neutral perspective as well, which
Thank
we
you.
always appreciate here. But Arsenal have really impressed me so far this season. Of course, you've beaten Liverpool. You've had some really, really good results. You beat us 3-0. The first 10 minutes, we were 2-0 down. But do you think you can go on and win the Premier League this year?
No. And I'll tell you why. I think we were chatting backstage, and I think I will tell you this. Our squad depth will be what affects us unless we really make some proper adjustments. And the reason why I say this is because every time we seem to go into a transfer market, Craig, we always seem to think we know what we want, and then we sort of hesitate, and someone else snatches that person away from us. Whether it was this September window or the summer window. In January, we didn't buy anyone because we wanted to trim the wage bill. And of course, we missed out on signing a certain midfielder by the name of Bruno Guimaraes, who went to Newcastle and scored that goal, which effectively ended our Champions League hopes. So you could see that it's a case of penny wise, pound foolish. And we've only played 9 games out of 38, not even 25% of the season. We haven't faced Manchester City either home or away. We haven't faced Chelsea either home or away. We still have to play Liverpool at Anfield, which will not be an easy game. We have to play Manchester United on our home turf. They beat us. That won't be easy. And of course, we won our North London derby at the Emirates, but going to White Hart Lane and winning is, it is an almost Herculean task because it's a long time since we've done that. And of course, I mentioned the squad depth. Today, I was doing a watch along for our Europa League game when we went to the Norwegian Arctic and played a team called Bodø Glimt. And we were playing on an artificial pitch which had undersoil heating. So obviously the Norwegian team, in theory, had more of the measure of that. We did have a few moments where we cut behind the defence, so of course we scored a rather fortuitous goal. But on another day, Bodo could have actually scored twice themselves, and we would have been up a gum tree, certainly not a cherry tree. And we would have had it difficult. And that's a sort of game which sort of brings us back down to earth and makes us realize that as far as we might have come over this season and the last season, we still have a long way to go before we can even be considered challengers either for the Premiership or even the Europa League. And I just think at this point in time that a lot of people are getting far too far ahead of themselves because we still have those issues to be solved. And as we always say, there's many a slip between the cup and the lip. So I'm not getting carried away until sometime later on in the season. Maybe at Christmas time we can evaluate ourselves. And let's take a look at the team you conquered, Leicester, when they had that miraculous season when they won the Premiership and we finished second to them, despite beating them home and away. They never thought at any time that they were going to win the Premiership until very close to the end of the season, because mind you, the previous season they had to huff and puff and save their house from getting blown down and avoid getting relegated. But that season was just it was a miraculous season. Everyone played to Ranieri's system beautifully. The spirit was amazing. I remember he promised his boys he'd take them out for pizza after a game, which was you won't see Mikel Arteta doing anything like that. And I remember even Harry Redknapp was a stickler for fitness and discipline. He would never do that either, banning alcohol in the players. I think in the I mean, he banned the players from having alcohol, I think, so there was no way that was going to happen. But we still have a long way to go, and Leicester took it on a game-by-game approach, and that's what we have to do as well. There is no way that we can even start uncorking the champagne until it gets cold enough. So I'm keeping it not necessarily in the freezer, but in a sort of a cool, an ice box, if you will, and only daring to take it out when we have the time. And I'm just seeing now United have finally broken the deadlock. I think it's Scott McTominay. So even they could also challenge us for at least the top four. They could also challenge us for the Europa League. And we still need to keep our feet on the ground. So I'm happy with the season so far, but we still have a long way to go.
Of course, we are in the midst of this takeover and it all appears to be done and dusted. So Bill Foley looks to have taken over the club. He was at the game against Leicester. There was loads of pictures from outside of him. He seemed to be smiling, having conversations with Simon Francis. Of course, Arsenal are a club that are owned by American owners, and they're not particularly popular, really, are they, at the Emirates?
Nope, not by any means. No.
So what would you say that we've got to be a bit cautious of? Or do you feel that Bill Foley is a lot different to the Kroenkes?
I do remember catching a bit of your interview with the American sports journalist who had a rather awkward sounding name, if you will. I think it was his social media profile. Yeah. And he was saying that I think in contrast to the likes of the Kroenkes and the Glazers, Foley seems to be, cut from a different cloth, if you will. And I'd like to think, Craig, that when it comes to Bournemouth, he will have done his research on the club because he knows he's coming to a club, for example, where the capacity of the stadium is not very high. He also realizes that all of the whatever ambitions he might have for the club, he's not going to be able to try to realize them immediately, and that's probably a good thing. With the likes of Arsenal and Manchester United being established clubs, you get these American owners who sort of have their own ambitions, and they probably feel as though they can be a bit comfortable because United and Arsenal have that standing. And one thing which angered me personally was the memory of Kroenke saying that he didn't come to Arsenal necessarily to win trophies. And you could see in the way he runs the club, he sort of treats it like a glorified hedge fund. With your American owner coming to Bournemouth, I think he realizes that he's coming to a club which has more of, of an old school feel, as it were, a small, a stadium with not the best capacity, but a stadium which has a very, very loyal fan base, if you will. I mean, the club has a loyal fan base. It has its own sense of history, its own sense of charm, and it's punching its weight right now in the Premiership. And if it can stay up in the stay up this season, then surely a few plans can be implemented to try to help the club develop in some respect. I think this gentleman who's come in will probably be sensible enough to try and take his time. I don't know what your ideas are on that personally, but I would think that he would, be a little bit mellow, as they would say, because with Kroenke and Glazer, you get people who believe that, they can just they can just do what they like because they have the status of owning such prestigious clubs. Whereas with Bournemouth, it's a club which has its own history, but probably isn't as well established. I think your owner will be very sensible. I believe he will do a lot of research and talking to a lot of people and trying to ingratiate himself a lot more, for example, with members of the club and also the even some of the fans. Maybe you don't see that with Stan because half the time he's across the pond, as they would say, focusing on his American sports teams, which are doing quite well on the field of play. So I think it's a good investment, and I hope that it will lead to bigger and better things for you. But as long as it's done gradually and not as some sort of a shock sort of thing, I think you lot will be fine.
One thing that come out of the Athletic and Ahmed Shobel actually mentioned that there is plans, of course, for the training ground. The turf is actually being laid now, but also with regards to the stadium. The stadium, we spoke to Eddie Mitchell, of course. He did have plans in the pipeline that could get it up to 22,000 from other sources around the club that I won't name, but they do mention that we can get it up to about 17,000. But is that really big enough for a Premier League side who want to establish ourselves? Because let's be fair, that's what we want to do. Is we want to get ourselves to a point and build a stadium, build a training ground, which means we don't have to go back to those dark days of League One and League Two.
I would say myself, I would say 17 isn't enough. Like I'm a bit surprised personally. Brentford have only built a new stadium with 17. If you're going to establish and want to be in the Premier League, you've got to push for 20. I think obviously if you're going up 25, 30, I think that's a bit too much. But yeah, you definitely want to be pushing over 20. So if we can't do it at the current stadium, and if it's not right to buy the stadium, then yeah, we would have to look at plans elsewhere. But yeah, I definitely think we need a bit more than 20,000.
I think one of the first things as well that was mentioned as well in that article by Ahmed Tubal is that we want to own Dean Court rather than renting it and take it off Structure Dean's hands. At that point, it sounds like the route is going to be a new stadium. But the last thing we want to do is drop back into the Championship and have one of these grounds. You look at the likes of Blackburn, Reading, even Southampton, when they went into the Championship, St Mary's was sometimes half full. That's the last thing we want, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is, and sorry, go ahead, Sam.
No, you carry on. You carry on, Manny.
Yeah, like well, here's the thing. I mean, obviously, given the way the stadium has been built, as I've said, Craig, a lot of change will come over time. And you mentioned about wanting to develop the training facilities. I think that'll be a good start. You obviously don't want to make such big changes as trying to, increase the stadium capacity, if it means because we've seen over history that in order to increase the capacity, a lot of clubs have had to move from their historic home stadiums to move to bigger and better, bigger environs. I'm not saying better because obviously, we had to move from Highbury to what a lot of people call Cash Burden Grove. And I think many fans will tell you that the move from Highbury was not the best idea because the old atmosphere of the club, everything about the club that was there in Highbury, everything that made it such a special experience and a memory, we had to let go of that. I'm just glad that we didn't completely get rid of it. It was converted to a housing complex or an apartment complex, I think, and the marble halls are still there. But When it comes to stadium capacity, that in itself should not really be considered, the benchmark of for Premier League success. Because yes, you want to have more people coming to watch the games, but you also want to see a lot more people away from the games and finding out more and more about the club.
Mhm.
And yes, you do want to expand, but again, expansion takes place over time, and support can build beyond the stadium, if you will, and that's one of the things that can really help raise the profile. I don't think you're going to see a situation where crowds will drop, because certainly this season, for example, how you've recovered as a starting point, you've actually gained a lot of new supporters, and you see the supporters feeling that the belief has come back into them. I don't think you're going to struggle for capacity at Dean Court necessarily, and if you can increase it over time, I think you will have a lot more people coming into the game. All these unheralded clubs, Craig, have a charm about them, whether it's a club like a Bournemouth or even a Huddersfield Town, which comes to the Premiership. Even their capacity, their stadium, the John Smiths, isn't that very big, but they lend something. And historically as well, Huddersfield have been one of the original members of the Football League. So you bring something different, and as long as you're able to make sure that you expand strategically and carefully, and make sure you develop in the areas that you think might need developing. You mentioned the training ground and other facilities as such. I think you're going to be fine. And remember, stadium capacity doesn't really mean very much. I mean, you've got all of these clubs, mind you, who have such big stadiums because they built a little bit too quickly. Some of them are still back in the Championship. Even a few more might be in League One. So don't what I would suggest is don't put too much emphasis on stadium capacity. I think you've got to focus on that development, and I believe that if you're able to stay up this season, and especially with the ownership, I believe that the owner has some good plans going forward, and I think he will, take the club forward in the best way possible.
With regards to, of course, Dean Court, it is the smallest stadium in the Premier League, and it's probably one of the smallest stadiums, if not the smallest, that's ever been in the Premier League. I guess if you count Plough Lane, you probably could say that that was the smallest. But it has got that atmosphere that clubs don't like coming here, because it is so small. It's close to the pitch, and although we are a friendly club, um, there is that atmosphere that does build up that you couldn't have in a bigger ground. Even though it may be nice and shiny. Um, so that's why I would like us, if we can, to do something with Dean Court. Add a number of seats, but what we want to do is as well, in my view, is keep our legacy, the legacy of these years, because no doubt there will be a point where we are relegated from the Premier League again. But if we've earned something out of that, that will be something that sets us in good stead. And the training ground, for example, will help us attract more players. But Sam, of course, you know the area well, as I do. We have got such a big catchment area
Yeah,
here, haven't we?
we have
Um,
indeed.
and if you think about it, we've only really got Southampton in this region. Of course, Yeovil were in the Football League until very recently, so you could say we've probably got most of Somerset. If Somerset wants to actually get involved in in a football league or a Premier League side, they're probably going to come here, aren't they?
Exactly, that's what he said. And I personally myself, I know quite a few people that can never get tickets to the game because obviously the ticket scheme at Bournemouth, and if you haven't got any points, you're never getting in. So I think the key thing for me is it'd be nice for us to own the stadium, at least own the stadium. And yeah, we could easily get 20 odd thousand if we keep on building and keep on growing our audience.
Of course, Bill Foley as well. It was mentioned in that interview with the US journalist, and also with Kieran Maguire as well. He's done a decent job with his NHL team and the Golden Knights, which was a new franchise. Um, can you see some comparisons, Manny, with that sort of scenario as to coming to Bournemouth? Because I guess we are a new Premier League side. Well, we've been here before, but we've recently been promoted. Do you think he'll see this as a little bit of a blank canvas? And do you think there's dangers of that?
As far as dangers are concerned, Craig, I don't really see anything in that respect because here's the thing. In America, for example, now I lived in America for 6 years, and of course, my ice hockey team would be the Tampa Bay Lightning, of course, perennially competing for the Stanley Cup as of these more recent years. Love seeing them play. And the Golden Knights obviously have come into the new league as a new team, and they've surprised a lot of people and performed quite well. So you see new teams coming into these sporting leagues in the US all the time. And these leagues will invariably be backed by very rich people who have money to burn. And they will also want to try to, stamp their mark by trying to get some players to join their expansion franchise and try and move forward. It's a bit like when a club moves into the Premier League. Fulham, for example, every time they come into the Premier League, they try to make some marquee signings. But of course, as a new team coming in and trying to compete with the big boys back in the back stateside, they also want to stamp their mark, want to try to get the right players in, a combination of some old veterans who might want a new experience, or some young, hungry people, and they do well, and they have the backing, and they obviously, given the size of the country, they have enough land area to build a new stadium, build that infrastructure, and see it through. In the UK, we don't have that advantage, you see. We're densely populated, but our land mass is very small. And so every time one team, for example, moves to a new stadium, you invariably see the old stadium sadly getting, demolished, whether it's Roker Park at Sunderland or Ayresome Park at Middlesbrough. All those historical places end up falling by the wayside because there's no use for them anymore. And that's sort of the way it is. Of course, with the money being put into these new clubs, and of course, Foley has pumped in a great many millions of dollars into the Golden Knights. And he can afford, of course, as I've said, to make sure he has the infrastructure there and also build a new chapter over there. Because Vegas, as you've said, is a very new team. And obviously, the people living over there want to try and dip their toes into that sporting arena, as it were. And of course, depending on results, if the team doesn't really perform well enough and they start to lose their fans, the franchise ends up moving to another city, because unlike the English fans, American fans get turned off by poor performing teams. And we've seen that all too often over there. With Bournemouth, of course, it's a different kettle of fish, because I wouldn't necessarily call Bournemouth a blank canvas per se, because the club has some sort of a history, but certainly in terms of trying to be established as, a new, an emerging, powerful club, if as it were, it's going to take some time. But he also has to contend, as I said, with an atmosphere there, which as you can agree with, Craig, isn't really the type of big bustling atmosphere that you would expect with one of the more established, better performing clubs in England, but which has its own character. And the challenge is, how do you bring your ideas of development into a club which may not be used to those dizzying heights? And the answer is simple. You just have to try to understand the culture first, understand the people, understand the team, understand the history and what has made it so successful, and then you sort of buy into it. And as I've said, I think Foley's a smart person. I don't think he would have wanted to buy this particular club if he didn't believe he could do something with it. But also, he wouldn't have wanted to buy it if he wasn't really, enamored by what Bournemouth has to offer. It's not like buying a Manchester United or an Arsenal where, the history is there for everyone to see, and it's sort of like a matter of pride in some respects, a sort of a feather in their cap, saying, I'm the owner of Manchester United. I get this publicity. With being the owner of Bournemouth, you won't necessarily get that publicity, but you do have that chance of being able to try and develop it and sort of work with it. And one thing which makes me happy is that he hasn't come out and made some stupid statements about not wanting to win trophies or not wanting to, do very much with them, not being interested in it. Because, mind you, Stan Kroenke isn't even in London half the time.
Mhm.
At least if Foley is willing to devote a lot more of his time, going back and forth between Vegas and Bournemouth and so forth, you will see a lot more in terms of the owner taking a lot of interest. And when the owner takes that more of an interest and really is willing to get himself involved, I believe the fans will warm to him. So, the fish rots from the head down, but if the head is in good condition, I believe the body will be fine.
Do you think that 130 million, guys, is quite a steal for this club? Because let's be fair, if somebody tried to buy Arsenal tomorrow, how much do you reckon it would cost them?
Arsenal, well, first of all, the Cronkies have made it very clear that it isn't for sale, and I would imagine that it would be at least 5 times that much, or maybe even
Mhm.
more. And the Cronkies seem content to just have it in their kitty and just treat it like a glorified hedge fund while they focus their attention on their American sporting franchises. Although of late, Josh seems to be having a word in Stan's ear and telling him, "Dad, no, we've got to try and do better."
Mhm.
But again, we also see it with Manchester United making it very clear to even the homegrown Jim Ratcliffe that you're going to get this club from us over our dead bodies. So it is a bit of a steal in some respects, but maybe it could be a bit of a shrewd bargain. And I think the journalist with whom you were speaking, Craig, will have told you that Foley seems to be a smart person who really wants to try and do something good for the city rather than treat it like just another piece in his, just another coin in his collection, as it were.
Let's talk about another side now. And of course, the side that we have just beaten, Leicester City. And of course, their owners have been absolutely fantastic for that club. They really have been they've been outstanding. Um, Unfortunately, of course, what happened to their owner with the helicopter crash was horrific. But is it come to a point now with Leicester where they're going, right, okay, we've got to recoup some of that money because they haven't spent very much, to be honest, Leicester.
No, they haven't spent.
Um, Go, no, Sam, that's all yours. I've spoken enough for now.
Yeah, they haven't spent much at all. So at this point, obviously, they're not gone to a great start. But I definitely don't think they'll get relegated. They'll pick up some form at some point. But yeah, I think it is time for them to recuperate a bit of money, definitely.
And do you think, Manny, that is the danger if, say, for example, Foley comes in, spends a lot of money, does really well with Bournemouth? Do you think there will be a point where he will need to stop that, recoup it, and there could be those dodgy years, say for example, like Leicester might be going through now?
I would say a better comparison would be Nottingham Forest, who brought
Yeah.
practically an entire squad of players, of whom your legend Steve Cook is one,
Hmm.
and who are now struggling even worse than Leicester, I would say, because I actually predicted that Forest would be higher up the table by now, and yet they're really struggling. They haven't been able to form a cohesive team. Why Steve Cooper was given that bumper contract, I have no idea. They've sacked their head of their person in charge of recruitment, which seems more and more to me that there's it's another one of a growing trend of a disconnect between the people responsible for recruiting at football clubs and the managers themselves. And the managers seem to view some players as not really what they would want. But the people in charge of recruiting say, no, we need to make sure that we have a proper squad. And I'm just thinking to myself, what is going on? And going back to Leicester again, you talk about recouping some of the money in the form of selling players. Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. Leicester have already gotten rid of Wesley Fofana after a protracted saga. They decided to cut their losses with him and let him go to Chelsea. And he's had the time of his life so far playing in the Champions League. But sadly, of course, he got injured. He will come back, though. And they obviously have to make do with a few economical purchases, if you will, if they want to try and strengthen the squad. The problem is they just don't seem to have the money, which means that they have to sell, and some of their prize assets could end up going if they're not really careful. Um, I hope that they will stay up because there is a lot about them that I like. I do like Brendan Rodgers as a manager, notwithstanding the fact that his last seasons at his last few clubs might not have really been the best. I mean, we all know about his struggles at Liverpool, and of course, with this Leicester team, he made them a lot more consistent. Not just the miracle team which won the Premiership and then floated here and there in the Premiership before somehow finding safety. No, he made them a consistent outfit that would challenge for a higher place in the table, won them their FA Cup. They just missed out on the Champions League. The following season, they reached the semi-finals of the Conference League. But of course, that might be the danger of trying to spend far too much too soon. With Bournemouth's case, I would like to see Foley just watch the squad right now and see where they finish. Because it seems to me that in addition to rocketing up the table ever since that 9-0 win, the cohesion and the team spirit that have been formed with that group of players is it's a joy to behold. And Foley needs to be very careful. If he were to bring some players in who might not necessarily fit into that Bournemouth mold, would that potentially harm that cohesion, that team spirit, that unity in the squad? And that is where Foley will have to be very careful. One thing which Foley will need to do is make sure that he sits down with the manager and the person in charge of recruiting and make sure that after this season, or maybe even at Christmas if you want, that whatever players might be needed, they all have to be in this as a team. And I think the reason why Thomas Tuchel was sacked at Chelsea was because he and Todd Boehly didn't see eye to eye on a few players which Boehly wanted at Chelsea, but Tuchel said no. So you can't afford to have that disconnect, especially given how you are as a club. I think Foley will be quite sensible with his spending because let's not forget he has other ventures as well. And he also realizes that trying to bring some, bring a huge influx of players or some players who might be really well known may not necessarily be the best thing to do if they, for example, insist on playing more minutes. Will they be a disruptive influence? So that is one thing which has to be considered. I do hope that Foley will be smart enough to have a chat with the manager and the head of recruitment, and they'll come to a decision that they're not going to spend too much on, acquiring new players. Now, this could change, mind you, if Bournemouth go on a cup run. If you end up somehow miraculously qualifying for Europe on the strength of a cup run, then maybe, the lure of European football might prompt Foley to say, well, we have to try and strengthen, and that means we might have to get rid of a few of the fringe players, if not the main players. But again, it'll all depend upon what happens this season, I think. I think the priority should be to solidify your position in the Premiership, stay up. If you can finish in the top half of the table, that is a brilliant springboard from where you can move forward and hopefully not spend too much money, because the more you spend initially, as you've alluded to, Craig, the more you will have to recoup later on. And if you can't get that money back, then, it can only lead to disaster. The house could come tumbling down.
I did have a really, really good conversation with our Fulham opposition preview guest, and we looked at the three sides. So, of course, Fulham and Bournemouth. Fulham, the last time they were in the Premier League and promoted, under Scott Parker, of course, they spent quite a bit of money and went straight back down. This time, they haven't done that, and we haven't done that either. But you look at Nottingham Forest and how much they've spent. It's Virgin. I think it's even got over 150 million, isn't it?
Yep.
And you look at that and the disruption, and then you look at where they are. Surely for a promoted side, the key to staying in the Premier League is to not change the wheel, so to speak, and to purchase players sensibly. Would you guys agree?
Sam, you can take this one.
Yeah, obviously I agree. But I do believe they did lose a couple of key players, including their goalkeeper in the summer. So they definitely had to bring in a few. But the way they've gone around it and brought in enough players, and they've loaned them out to their club that's linked to them, Olympiacos, haven't they? They've loaned a few players there. Yeah, I think they've just gone a bit mad. It's a bit like when QPR were up in the Premier League and they brought in like Julio Cesar and things like that, and it didn't help them and they got relegated. It looks like Nottingham Forest will go the same.
Of course, Marinakis is gonna. If Nottingham Forest do go down into the Championship, how is Marinakis going to even manage that?
Good question. And it sort of segues back into the issue of who was responsible for giving Cooper that contract. One theory, Craig, is that maybe he was given that contract so that if in case any other club would want to come in for him, they could charge a hefty compensation package in return. I really don't see the sense in doing something like that, because it reminds me a great deal of when Arsenal offered Arteta his bumper 3-year deal before the end of the season when the target hadn't been achieved. So to do that at this point in the season was just madness. And again, it goes back to the disconnect between the owners and everyone else down below. Who is making the decisions? Whose idea was it to get that many people? And of course, if you spend more than you get in, you leave the club in the state of a deficit, and you do have to recoup that money. Of course, even if it's a free transfer, you lose that much more in wages for the players, and that is something that wasn't really taken into account. I like the example that you cited with Fulham there, because obviously they wanted to keep the core of the squad that got promoted from the Championship. Obviously, they did make an upgrade in getting our former keeper Bernd Leno. Harsh on Marek Rodak, who's now been the key. The number one for 2 promotion campaigns, but obviously they feel that Leno's a bit of an upgrade, but Rodak does get his chances. And Fulham started well. They've stuttered a little bit, but you could see them staying in the Premiership because they maintain that cohesion. And I think that's something on which we can all agree. Buying an entire squad simply just doesn't cut it. And the worst part is, Craig, that several of that Nottingham Forest starting 11, several of them are just looking completely out of form. They haven't really done very much this season. I think of the 2 ex-United boys, Dean Henderson and Jesse Lingard. Henderson's made a few decent saves, but not done very much, and has, been leaking goals, like more goals. He's been leaking than a broken sieve, for heaven's sake. And Lingard hasn't done very much. There are a few players who have done quite well, but it's been offset by several players not really pulling their weight, and there's been a lot of change and a lot of rotation. And that's what you get when you get that squad, when you buy that many players. You are not buying that many players. You can't buy that many players if you just want to try and look to stay in the Premiership. No, you've got to be a lot more sensible. And that is sort of the issue with both with Forest. And going back to Leicester, they will probably have to sell one or two of their players. The only issue I have is that if those players are going to be key to them, recovering from their horrible start and hopefully staying for their sake, staying up, then it could prove to be a little bit difficult. And their current first 11, mind you, is probably going to be the team that will play for them going forward, with a few fringes coming in. Who can they possibly sell? So that's another quandary that they will effectively face. And it's just it's a sad state of affairs, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done internally with those clubs in question.
Of course, Nottingham Forest and Marinakis does own Olympiacos, as we did mention as well a little bit earlier. But we've seen this sort of situation at Watford. Watford do sack their managers. They sack their managers more than I have hot dinners, to be perfectly honest. But we've seen that situation because, of course, the Pozzo family do own Udinese as well. And if Forest were to go down, is there a case there that they might do something where they allow players to go to Olympiacos and then pay for Forest for those? I just don't know how they might be able to cheat the system that way.
Sam, go ahead.
You go ahead, Manny. Honestly, you can take it on.
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned obviously Marinakis and Olympiakos, and of course, he was responsible for getting rid of the former Huddersfield manager Corberan, who had taken Huddersfield to the brink of Premiership, only to of promotion to Premiership, only to lose to Nottingham Forest in the playoff final. And it does seem to me again that it could be an option. It could be an option because we've seen this sort of arrangement going on with a few Premiership clubs and a lot of their other clubs, associate or affiliate clubs in different leagues. So this could potentially be a possibility. My only issue, of course, is the clubs themselves will, in that case, will have to chip in. You mentioned that Marinakis owns Olympiakos.
Yeah.
I think they're struggling in their Europa League campaign. They're not going to qualify. I think European football is out of the question now. And they've also made some acquisitions in terms of getting some star names to come and sign for them, including the ex-Brazil and Real Madrid defender Marcelo, who was, of course, a Champions League winner despite being on the bench the whole season. So I really don't know what sort of an arrangement that would be. I don't know if Olympiacos have any more vacancies for the Forest players. And it just goes to show that when you sign those 22 players, you need to have a sort of a contingency plan if things don't go your way. Or better still, just don't make that many signings. I think some of those players, Craig, will probably end up, being encouraged to go out on loan. If the club were to get relegated, then several of those players will obviously want to try to exercise any kind of a release clause. They will want to put themselves in the shop market. There's some quality players in that squad, some really good players, some consistent internationals, and they will not take very kindly to either not getting the game time they need or being a part of a squad which will end up getting relegated. So, if not between their clubs, then I think the club will invariably end up having to lose money. And listen, we've lost money ourselves. We bought Nicola Pepe for 72 million quid, and now we've sent him off on loan. So we're not going to recoup that much money on him either. And the amount of money that we paid for Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang and his wages, we let him go for free to Barcelona. He tore it up in Spain, torched Real Madrid at the Bernabeu. Now he's at Chelsea. So again, it just goes to show, I think, a lot of these clubs who think they have enough money to burn and who are trying to be too ambitious for their own good, I just think in terms of fiscal responsibility, they've been sorely lacking. And there definitely needs to be some sort of an audit into why those transfers were made, how they could have been made, how the money to buy those players was even raised, and so forth. And if you recall, I believe there was a lot of controversy surrounding the Leicester takeover um, by the current owners. And I mean, obviously, that the owner at the time was thinking of raising the money through lottery ticket sales of all things. So there will need to be an audit. And back to your question, as I've said, I don't think there will be any space in Olympiacos for any of the Forest players to go. So it will invariably lead to a fire sale of players where they will either be sold at cut price or hopefully, some big clubs will be encouraged if those players are young enough to take those players on and maybe give them a chance there. Some of those players will stay on in the championship if they are deemed, to have the right character to help them recover, as is always the case. But it just goes to show you can't spend too much money as soon as you come in. And hopefully, seeing the struggles of Forest and a few other clubs, Leeds United in the early 2000s being another example, you see those struggles and you think, I don't want that to happen to my club. And yet, history always repeats itself,
We've been there, haven't we, Sam?
We have been there indeed.
Yeah. So
we've been at the very bottom, now we're at the very top. So we've seen it all.
We definitely don't want to go back to those days, and especially by overspending. And I think that's the biggest concern for me, is that we do overspend and land ourselves in trouble that we can't get ourselves out of. So that is the nightmare scenario. Of course, let's have a look forward to this Fulham game. So of course they are just a point behind us. They're a place behind us. They have got Marco Silva. He's done a very good job there since taking over from Scott Parker. And to be fair, it's going to be a difficult place to go, isn't it?
It will be. It will be. A lot of people have said that the prospect of playing at Craven Cottage in front of their support is always something quite difficult. And even when Newcastle went there and torched them 4-1, they were quite fortunate to have had the Fulham player Chalobah being sent off. That really was a spanner in their works, as it were, and it forced Fulham to change their strategy. And Newcastle, with their attacking prowess, as it were just all over them, really. I mean, it was as if they were just magpies feasting on a dead carcass, if you will. So I had to say that. I do apologize. That was a silly comparison, but that's sort of the way it is. And I want to take a look at, obviously, Fulham in question and sort of talk about how tactically they could line up. They're doing actually quite well in the Premiership so far. I mean, despite their 4 defeats, they are 1 place behind you. And there's an interesting debate going on the BBC website about where Bournemouth will finish in comparison to Fulham. A lot of people will say that there are a couple of people over here who are sort of talking about that. But if you were to analyze Fulham tactically, they've often preferred to play with a 4-2-3-1, and they based their success on the strong defense led by the stand-in captain, Tim Ream. Tom Cairney, who's normally the club captain, has not really started a game, and he's often come off the bench. But this game against West Ham was a game where they probably struggled a little bit, and the 4-2-3-1. Obviously, Mitrovic not being there was a big loss. They still have Neeskens Cabano, and in this game against West Ham, mind you, they had Bobby de Cordova-Reid playing as a right back of all things. So they're currently affected with a few injuries right now. They do have the Welshman Dan James coming and playing in the 3-man attacking midfield behind their striker, but it wasn't Mitrovic. It was a guy named Carlos Vincius who was starting. So this seems to be the formation they normally play, and how this will necessarily affect you coming up against them. There will be some gaps open, and your 4-man midfield could very well end up being either stretched or tested on one hand, but on the other hand, you could exploit a few gaps in their system and try and get the ball through to Billing and Solanke or whoever will be starting up front. It could be Anthony for you guys. So I think tactically they've set up this way. I don't see Marco Silva changing his formation. As I've said, Tim Ream has been a colossus in the defense. Leno has been quite more than decent in goals since leaving Arsenal. And they still have some talent like Kevin Mbabu, who can come back into the defense if you want someone off the bench. Tom Cairney can also come on and maybe leave a bit of an impact. Shane Duffy is another defender, Republic of Ireland international, on loan at Fulham. So they could possibly... It'll be an interesting game. It'll be a sort of an interesting tactical battle with their 4-2-3-1 against your 4-4-2. And as for Marco Silva, well, he was one of those Watford fans who was in and out of the revolving door. He certainly didn't do very well at Everton. I think it's a case with him of, the third club being the charm at Fulham. So I think he's, as you've alluded to, Craig, he's sort of done the right thing by not insisting on buying too many players. It is the bulk of the players who got them promoted from the Championship, with 1 or 2 strategically added in. And of course, Mitrovic, who was their key man that season, is still the leading man. Of course, he's injured now. He wasn't in the squad, which played against West Ham. So it'll be interesting to see how Fulham play, but certainly a good tactical battle. And I hope that Gary O'Neill will do his homework on them and find out which players need to be focused on, if you will.
And of course, before we actually do our next cherry picking, we'll have played somebody else at home. And of course, that team is that lot down the M27, as I call them. I can't wait. Honestly, can't wait. And
you're talking about Southampton?
Yes, Southampton of all teams. Yeah, to be honest, they are in trouble, aren't they?
Yep, a good deal of trouble. They overachieved against Chelsea when Tuchel was still manager, and they are just sitting right now above the relegation zone. The only reason why they're not further down is because Wolves also look in disarray, and
Mhm.
enough has already been said about Forest and Leicester City. So they're normally a team which does fight hard, but in their last 6 games, they've only won once. And this will be interesting to take a look and see how they could tactically line up. Obviously, they got creamed by Manchester City, and we'll have to take a look at that and see how they could do. Obviously, when you take a look at Southampton, you can't look beyond James Ward-Prowse as their key man. And I'm just taking a look again and seeing how they've lined up tactically. Of course, not many teams have been able to cope with City's formation. If they don't play a 4-3-3, they also go for a 4-2-3-1 with Bernardo Silva and Rodri being the defensive midfielders in front of the back four, giving De Bruyne and Foden and others space to do their thing. But they often prefer to play a 4-3-3 with Ilkay Gundogan coming into the middle of the field. That's about Manchester City. And Southampton also employ a 4-4-2. So this is going to be really a game where you could end up either cancelling each other out. There will be some really good battles in the middle of the pitch. I think Ward-Prowse and Ibrahim Diallo will certainly be key. Stuart Armstrong on the right wing has looked really good, and Joe Aribo has also come in and lent some impetus. And of course, you've got Adam Armstrong and Che Adams, who are their two strikers, and certainly who have looked quite good. I think they probably, any weaknesses, if any, could possibly come in the defence. And although Gavin Bazunu, the Irishman, has looked quite good, he has also leaked quite a bit of goals. So the challenge here for you will be to try and, again, overcome the midfield and try and get behind the defence and cause them a few problems. And if you can do that, then certainly that could be an option. Of course, Southampton do have our former gunner Maitland-Niles on loan. He's come into the side as a midfielder, but has also been sort of in and out of the side. So they do have problems, and it's going to be up to Ralph Hasenhüttl to try and find the best combination. And even here as well, it's going to depend on whether Gary O'Neill decides to either stick with the 4-4-2 that has served him well, or maybe switch to a 4-5-1 just to shake things up a bit. But if he goes to a 4-5-1, I don't know if either Billing or Solanke can play on their own. Would that mean bringing Kiefer Moore back into the team? I think he has to stick with the 4-4-2. So it's going to be an interesting game, and I think the battle will probably be won in the middle of the field. As long as you can prevent supply to Adam Armstrong and Che Adams, who are quite potent goal scorers, if you can also nullify Ward-Prowse, that's pretty much half the battle won.
Of course, we're going to be there, Sam, aren't we? We're not going to miss that for the world.
I'll never miss that, mate. Definitely going to be a good game. I think, yeah, literally, if we play like we did Saturday, attackingly, I think with Bournemouth sometimes the key thing for us is sometimes we just keep passing, get closer to the goal, and we just don't take that shot. When we're attacking and we have chance to just shoot, like Philip Billing showed this season, he scored some good goals already. I think if we continue playing as we are, we can win comfortably against Southampton. Fulham Saturday will be very hard, but I definitely think we'll go out there and give them a good game and hopefully bring back at least a point.
Of course, Southampton have got West Ham on Sunday before, playing us on the Wednesday night. So I wonder, could we end Ralph Hasenhüttl's time at Southampton? It's looking like it could be very possible, especially if they get beat by West Ham as well.
Yes.
I would go so far to say, Craig, that a Derby Day defeat could very well be the nail in the coffin, because Southampton have been a Premier League team for longer than Bournemouth have, and losing to you lot would be something that the crowd at St. Mary's would not want to take. Surprisingly, the calls for Hasenhüttl's sacking have not really been as loud as they have been for, say, Brendan Rodgers or even a few other coaches, probably because they feel that as long as Ward-Prowse and a few other players are there, they're able to attack quite a bit and score a few goals, but they just seem to have lapses in concentration, and they still have the fight. The only issue is if they do lose against West Ham, and of course if Southampton lose against you lot, then the calls are going to get a lot louder, and maybe the board will be forced to take a decision. They took it quickly with Bruno Lage at Wolverhampton, so it could be possible. It could be possible if they lose both those two games. It could be bye-bye, Ralph.
I'm just looking at Wolves as well now, and of course Wolves have got Nottingham Forest on Saturday, so it's very, very possible that Southampton could find themselves in the bottom three by the time they play us, and especially one thing that Southampton fans, I think, if Wolves is going to be the team that is going to be around there for the moment, I'm sure other teams will drop in there. Hopefully, it's not us, but I'm sure with Nuno Espirito Santo, being rumoured of going back to Wolverhampton Wanderers, I think that could really spur them on because he's done a very good job in the past. And to be fair, again, they're a team that they haven't made wholesale changes, have they?
Not really. I mean, they perhaps made a few changes in terms of getting a few players in. They also sold a few players. I believe Morgan Gibbs-White went to Forest, and
Hmm.
Leander Dendoncker moved to Aston Villa. And bear in mind, Villa could also, if results go really badly, they could also see. I could also see them dropping a little bit further and putting Steven Gerrard under a bit of pressure. As far as Wolves are concerned, well, the way they performed against Chelsea, they never really offered very much, and they set their stall out with a 4-5-1, hoping against hope that they could, prevent Chelsea from scoring. Fat lot of good that did. 3-0, and no joy for the former Chelsea striker Diego Costa, who was one of those people who came in. I was impressed with Diego Costa when he joined Wolves and when he came on against West Ham, because he looked as though he had recovered a little bit of that sharpness in the air. He was getting up and had a couple of headers which could have, had those headers been on target, could very well have gone in any other day. And he still has the ability. So once he starts scoring, maybe Wolves can have some respite. But again, they have to have a new coach coming in. As you know, Lange got sacked. And once that new coach comes in, if they can perhaps get some sort of a bounce, then it could be good. And what better way to start than against bottom side Nottingham Forest, who clearly look disoriented, disjointed, and out of ideas. So, as far as Southampton are concerned, to answer your question, Craig, whether they could find themselves in the relegation zone, it could be a possibility. But don't forget, even Aston Villa, if they don't get results, could also come in. West Ham are starting to recover, but even they're not too far away from trouble. The other teams, for now, look to be safe. So it could be that if Wolves start to get that new manager bounce and start to get some positive results, if Southampton aren't careful, they could find themselves slipping down. So it will remain to be seen what happens. And all I can say to the Saints is that they better be praying for some divine intervention.
Well, hopefully they're not going to get that divine intervention against us, and they're not going to, because let's be honest, I think it's our time to beat them, and I'm sure Well, the last time was at St Mary's, wasn't it?
Yes, indeed.
Yep, 3-1. I remember Callum Wilson as well scoring that goal. So, fingers crossed we get another. I'd quite happily see that night replicated, a 3-1 win at Dean Court under the lights. Be amazing. But thank you so much for coming on today, Manny. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, and all the very best on I believe is it Sunday, isn't it, that you're playing our well, one of our least favourite sides in Leeds.
Yeah, we're playing Leeds, yeah, and that is a game where we are expected to win, Craig, but that could also be one of those games which could potentially be a banana skin.
Mhm.
Leeds have done well in patches, and obviously, given their attacking talent, they could also uh, they should have been expected to do a little bit more in terms of winning games, and certainly they could pose a threat with the players they have. Rodrigo, Bamford, Aronson, Harrison. and obviously their defense is starting to form a little bit of a shape. So that could be the type of banana skin that we need to avoid. But I'm sure Arteta, to his credit, will have the boys motivated for that, because he'll want to make sure that the results that did take place against teams like Southampton and Brighton and Crystal Palace, which derailed our bid, never happen again. I do seem to believe there is a bit of toughness, but I will also temper that by saying against Liverpool, we got lucky with some very, very contentious VAR decisions, which went in our favour. We had a clear penalty against us, which was denied. The first goal that Liverpool scored was offside. So again, it's a reminder. I mean, a lot of fans are saying, well, we deserve this sort of luck, but it's another reminder. It can just as easily turn against you, and that's why you have to be a little bit careful. And yeah, it is Sunday that we're playing Leeds, and as I said, it's a game which we need to take very seriously. Elland Road is traditionally not an easy place to go and play, and their fans are going to be, really motivated to make sure that we don't get a good result. Player to watch, of course, Eddie Nketiah, who was on loan at Leeds United in the Championship, played under Marcelo Bielsa, didn't really have the best time. And Bielsa wasn't very complimentary about him. So why we gave this boy a swanking new contract worth 100,000 quid a week and the iconic number 14 jersey. He drew a blank tonight, and if you can take a look at Arsenal Twitter, they're going mad right now. So, of course, last season he did score against Leeds and made that famous Ghostbuster celebration, if you will. I call it that because we asked him who you're going to call, and then didn't do anything against Spurs and Newcastle. So he's going to be one to watch if Gabriel Jesus doesn't really recover in time from that head injury of sorts that he sustained against Liverpool. So we do have a few injury issues. We do have issues with squad depth, and that's why we have to take this game very seriously. But I'm confident enough to predict a 2-1 win. I just hope that, it doesn't get jinxed in any way.
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed for you, mate. And of course, Mr. Harrison, I will, of course, be seeing you on Wednesday, and no doubt we'll be playing football as well together before long as well.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll try not to take out the goalkeeper this time round, but
Yeah.
Yeah, this is what I love. I mean, both of you obviously are closely involved with this, and you see each other every day, and you form that bond. And I can see the, the camaraderie that comes through every time you do this stuff. And as pleasing as it was for me to be here, it's even more pleasing for me because, I may be an Arsenal fan, but I like to consider myself more of a football fan first than a fan of the club. And I just like to talk, and I just want to. I do enjoy coming on these streams where, whatever I say can be taken seriously, can be appreciated. I don't like to, chat rubbish. I like to do a little bit of work before coming over here because I don't want to, sell you guys a horse and deliver you a donkey with what I have to say. So the fact that you've invited me for this and you keep wanting to have me back, Craig, it makes me so happy. And as long as I'm free and available, I'd love to do that. And it really makes me more happy to be involved with your own club, following your fortunes and hoping you do well. And once again, all I can say right now is thanks a lot once again, and up the Cherries.
Yep, definitely. Thank you so much, Manny. And
Cheers,
how
mate.
about next week? Matt will be back next week from watching The Circle of Life. So he's gone to the Lion King. So yeah, hopefully, fingers crossed, there could be 4 of us.
That's it.
I'm looking forward to that. Obviously, mate. Wouldn't miss it. Wouldn't want to miss it. I will definitely see if my schedule is free. I will be on here very quickly.
Excellent.
Cherry picking's fun.
Yep, definitely. Well, and thank you everybody for joining us on this show as well. Please do remember to hit the like, the subscribe, and the bell button below. Let us know all your thoughts. And until the next video, up the cherries, and I'll see you in the next one.
Up the Cherries.